The next step in the apron project is going to be to make some D-rings. I have some of this number 4 copper laying around, and a few different experiments led me to a process which I think is going to work pretty well. I did try soldering the ends, I tried riveting the ends, and at the end of it, the amount of cold work on the copper produced a D-ring that was hard enough to where it's not going to deform under normal use, yet it's still fairly simple to make. So what we're going to do is start with some 5-inch pieces of copper. I'm going to cut them off of this coil here. Now, a couple of times through this process, we are going to have to anneal them, so we'll heat them up and quench them. At the end of it, though, what we're going to want to do when we start getting close to the shape is to continue to cold work the copper, which will give it that hardness that we need, rather than being soft enough to deform under a slight pull. So we'll go ahead and cut 4 lengths off. And I'm just going to roughly measure them out, and then we'll cut them a bit long so that we can trim them down to size. This will make them a little bit easier to work with. So these have been coiled and uncoiled a few times, and while they're still fairly soft, it's going to be a lot easier to work these if they're dead soft. You can see that just bending them a little bit firms them back up. So I'm going to go ahead and anneal each one of these. Lay these down and mark them slightly proud of 5 inches so that I have a little bit of room to file them. I showed these cutters in another video. I ground the backs flat as opposed to the taper that they had. And this is a great example of the difference. So if we come up here, you can see how flat that end is as compared to the pinched off end that they leave from the factory. So with those all marked, I'm going to make sure that I have my flat sides on the line. And we'll cut each of these to 5 inches. I'll take my file against the edge of the bench, all the way out here to the side, and file the ends flat. What you can do now is just take some light paper and chamfer over the ends slightly, just so that there's nothing sharp sticking out. So I mentioned before we were going to anneal these to dead soft. I didn't get them quite cherry red. I did get them to start glowing, even though it was a little hard to see under the fluorescent lighting. They are very soft, however. So with the amount of work that we need to do, and with another annealing process partway through, they'll be plenty soft enough to work without worrying about them breaking. What I'm going to do now is visually center them, and then start forming this by bending right about at the halfway mark. The flat side is going to be captured within a leather loop, so we don't have to worry about it being perfectly centered. If it is slightly off, as long as it's near the middle, it'll suit our purposes just fine. So now we have 5 rings started. We have this pretty close. What we're going to do now is I'm going to make a mark to show me where I need to bend these to start getting the ends kind of close. As I mentioned, we are going to wind up hammering these quite a bit to form the final shape, partly to bring it into shape, but also partly to continue hardening that copper. Obviously, if they bend that easy, they could deform under use. So I'm going to take my pliers, and these are the ones that I use for stitching, so that the jaws have been ground smooth, and that should prevent it from marring the copper too much. If we were to come in here and grab with the serrations, we'll leave big marks on the copper. The downside to this is that it's not going to be as easy to grab and bend because it's going to want to slip and rotate. Now you can actually push copper pretty far in a softened state before it gets too hard to work. But I'm going to take a pause for a moment and go ahead and anneal these again in a slightly darker setting to where we might be able to see the glow. So we've got them all glowing a nice dull red, which is actually a little hotter than we had them last time. If we bring them back, they're still a little bit warm, but they cool down from a dull red glow to handleable fairly quickly. They're a little warm. The water's actually quite hot at this point, so we're only going to expect them to cool down as far as the water's cooled. So now we should be able to form these to their final shape. And they can actually form a little bit more by hand. So I'm needing even less pressure this time than I did previously. So what I want to do is get these ends closed. And once I get these ends closed, we'll be able to start putting this shape in and flattening this back out using the horn of our anvil. So you can see it's already coming into a D shape. We'll just need to refine this a little bit as we work. So what I'm going to do now is start bringing the sides in. I'm trying not to let the corners dig in too much. They will a little bit as we work through this. We can clean that up with some paper at the end. What I'm doing is holding this center to center, so as I hit this side, it doesn't just rotate out. So each strike is hardening this a little bit more. You can see it's already starting to toughen up. So what we'll do now is start refining the shape, bringing these together a little bit. And then in a moment or two, we'll switch over to a metal hammer and start planishing the outside, which will harden it up even more. And that gives us 5 rings with a very similar profile. Since we've got these the shape that I want, I do want to toughen them up a little bit more. So I'm going to just go ahead and planish around. We do have some strike marks from the anvil right in here. I'm going to go ahead and clean these up a little bit and then sand those down just to get rid of any rough edges. So we'll go ahead and take a little sandpaper and get those corners cleaned up. I'm not a fan of salt and vinegar potato chips, but a little bit of salt and vinegar for copper works really well. These have been sitting in here for about 20 minutes now. You can see that all the oxides from the heat treating and anything else is completely dissolved off. A nice bright pink copper. They're not very shiny. That would be more of a mechanical polishing, but they are completely cleaned up. I'm going to go ahead and fish the rest of these out. And this is probably about 4 ounces of vinegar with about a teaspoon of table salt mixed in. Ketchup actually works really well for this too. It's just a little messier and, well, let's face it, vinegar and a little bit of table salt is a lot cheaper than a bottle of ketchup. But the high vinegar and salt content in ketchup does pretty much the same thing, and it sticks a lot better too. So it's something that you can kind of smush on or brush on if it's not something you can completely submerge. And here's a good example. You can see that there's still a little bit of discoloration on this, but a quick wipe and it comes right off. So now you can see the nice bright pink copper versus what they started out as, and what it'll eventually get back to. So while these are all a nice bright pink copper color right now, they will age out to a nice brown color. There are methods that you can use to speed up the patina process. Things as simple as boiled eggs, mashing up some hard-boiled eggs, throwing these in there in a sealed container for a day. You can also use baking soda to give them a brownish color, which usually is going to take between an hour and a day. There are various recipes with ammonia that'll give it bring on more of the green copper patina. So in time, these will turn a nice brownish color, and we can move on to our next step now.